And so for the demo today, there's a couple components. So it cuts across a few different things. We need art, obviously, to make our title screens. And we're going to need some Godot stuff to add them. And we're also going to have to learn how to switch scenes so we can go from the title screen into the first level. So there's a few different things that we'll learn in that process. I'll try to do it relatively fast, so we'll have some time in class, but there are a few steps, so we don't want to skip any steps. So for our user interface design, we need some titles, as I mentioned. We also need some buttons. And so I'm going to make some basic buttons so that we'll be able to click on a button to restart the game or move from the main title to the instructions or to the to another level. And I'll try to show a few different ways of doing things, but I'll try to keep time in mind as well. So I'm going to start by making some art. So I'm going to go to Pascal. And I'm going to start with some titles. So for making titles, I want my screen to be my art to be a little bit bigger so that I have more room. So I'm going to go to resize and I'm going to do 512 by 512. So the height of my game is 512. And so even though my game is a little bit wider, this will take up the full height. And so I can organize it in the screen that way. So I have the grid set up there. So I can turn the grid on or off. It might be useful if you're designing something a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file to start. So I'm going to go to my art folder. And I'm going to make a new folder here. And I'll call this UI. So all of my UI stuff is going to go in here. UI stands for user interface. These are components that are not part of the game, but things that we design for the user to be able to start the game and interact with the game interface. So for this one, I'm going to do my titles. This one, I need to do these as individual files to make them textures. So there's different ways to do this, but I'm going to ultimately export these as individual files so that I don't have to worry about adding sprites into my user interface textures. So with the user interface in Godot, we'll see in a little bit, there's a lot of different ways that we can do a layout. And it's not like a game where everything is inside of the game, everything is on top of the game. So it's more like doing a design for like a website or something like that. So for my titles, one thing that can be useful is putting some art that you already made into the titles so you don't have to make completely new art. So I'm going to go to my sprites and I'll throw in, let's see, maybe I'll throw in my cactuses and my birds and my character. And here's my bug. And let's see, what else do I have in here? I have some apples. Oh, I don't want them to overlap. Let's undo that. Okay, here's my bug. My apples. Oh, and my NPC. So if I already have a bunch of art, now I can use the art to kind of design things a little bit. So I can use the select tool. Actually, I'll use the lasso select tool and I'll zoom in a little bit and select some stuff and move it around. Oops, kind of hard to use. So I'll move my cactus over here. And maybe I'll take out one of the crabs. I'll just delete one of my characters and the rest of my crabs. And let's grab this guy and put him over here. And then I'll grab my NPC and put him down here. And I'll delete this guy. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this composition, but by adding in some of the art, oh, I have my apple down here I forgot about. So by adding in some of the art I already made, I can save myself a little bit of time with designing the main title for the game. And so I'm going to move this down here. And then I'm just going to draw a title for the game. I can use the color for the main character. And I'm just going to call this, oh, I need to grab my pen. So I'll call this this is actually nice with the grid. It's easier to draw these letters, although I can still screw it up. So obviously you should come up with a better name than just my game, but this is what I've got for this demo. So I need a little more space. I'm going to move it over and finish my letters. And then I'll use my paint bucket to fill it in. And one thing that you might want to do instead of making this green is make it like white so that you can change the color. But this is pretty good. I'm just going to leave it like this. So this will be my title screen, and I'll put some buttons like around here, something like that. So that'll be my main title. So then I'm going to have some instructions. And so I'm going to just write instructions here. This is kind of a long word. I'm probably going to run out of room. You also don't have to write it like this. I'm just doing it like this. Instruction. It's kind of fun. Okay, so I've got some instructions. So my game is pretty simple, but I do want to give the player some instructions for how to play. Yeah. What? The what? The grid? Since it's a bigger canvas, that gives me a better sense of the space. So it's not, usually I'm drawing on like a really small canvas for my sprites, like 32 by 32, but this is much bigger. So this gives me the grid gives me a better sense of how much space I'm taking up. And it also makes it easier to write text, although you wouldn't know from looking at my text. Makes it a little bit easier because you have some grid lines to follow instead of just trying to follow a straight line. Okay, so for my instructions, it's pretty simple. I just have like the arrow keys. So I'm just going to draw the arrow keys. I don't know why it does this weird thing where it starts trying, like the computer is like interrupting. I hate this computer. I can't draw little lines for some reason. It won't let me do that. It's really weird. It doesn't like my tablet. I'll just use the mouse for a second. Okay. Okay, so that's my, so I'll just put like walk here so people know how to walk. And then the only other button that I have is the Z button jumps. I think it's Z. I can change this later if I need to. So I'll put jump here. Okay, so this is pretty goofy looking, but I have some instructions. So I'm going to save that. And then I need like an end game title. So like you lose or you died or something like that. So for this one, I'll just put you died on here. You could have like a drawing of the player being dead or something like that. But I don't think I ever actually made that, so I'm going to skip that for now. But you could obviously add whatever art you want on here. I'm just going to write you died. Or that's kind of mean. Let's just say game over. Died seems kind of overly aggressive. So I'll just say game. Oh, that's really bad. Game over. Again, I don't know, you don't have to like draw the text like this. You can really put whatever you want here. I'm just doing this as an example. Okay, so I have a game over screen that will show if we die. And then let's have a screen for if you win. So I'll just write you win here. So again, you can put anything you want in these graphics. I'm just doing these examples. You can spend more time on this and make it look nice. So these are my titles. I'm going to save this and then I'm going to export to my game. So for this one, I want a zip file. I don't want a sprite sheet because I'm going to have to put these individual frames into separate images. So I'm going to change the prefix to titles and then click download zip. And I'm going to go to sprites and I'll do titles.zip. And so once we're ready, we'll go over there and we will extract the zip files. But let's make some buttons first. So I'm going to make a new Pascal. This one's going to be smaller again, like my typical sprites. But I want the buttons to be a little bit wider than they are tall. So I'm going to click on maintain aspect ratio to turn that off so I can have something wider than the height. And I'm going to make the width 64 pixels. And then I'm just going to draw some different button states. And we can either put text over the buttons in the game, or we can write text directly on here. So let's make some button states. So I'm going to go and save this. I'm going to save this as button and click save as. And so this will be our basic button. And so for our different button states, like I'll just have like a button like this, and we'll put some text over it in Godot. So I'll have the default button will just be black. And then I'll make a copy of that and we'll make a hover button. So I'll fill this in with white and we can change it to different colors. Make this a little bit farther down here. So we have some different states so that like we can hover over the button and the button color will change. So we'll see that it's activated. We can add another state. I'll duplicate the white one and maybe I'll fill it in with a dithering tool. So that might look kind of cool. So the dithering adds two different colors. One of my colors is actually see-through. So it'll just kind of look a little grayed out. So that could be another good button state. I think we only really need 3 button states. So I'll go with this, but we can always come back and add another button state. So this is for when we hover over the button, and then when we click on the button, we want different visuals so that we can see the buttons reacting. So I'm going to save this. And again, I have to export a zip file, not sprite sheets, because I need these to be separate when I do UI stuff. So I'm going to choose zip and call this button and click download zip. And that's in my game sprites folder, so that's where I want it. I'm going to click save. And I'm going to leave these up because I may need to edit these later. But now I'm going to go to my game sprites folder. So let's close all this stuff out. So I'll go to my game folder, go into the game, and go to sprites. And I have a couple new zips, the button. So I'm going to extract this. I'm going to right click and go to extract all and just extract it right here. So there's my button folder. And then my titles are all the way down here. I'm going to do the same thing, right click and extract all, and then click extract. So there's my titles. And so now I'm going to delete the zip files. I don't need these anymore. I'm going to delete this one as well. And then for the titles, I'm just going to change the names of these. Even though I can see the graphics, I want to see the names. So I'm going to rename this one titles. This is the title of the game, so just title. I'm going to rename this titles underscore win. I'm going to name this game over. And I'm going to rename this one instructions. So that'll just make it easier to find. You don't have to do this, but it'll make it a little bit easier to find this when we're looking in the game. I misspelled instructions, so I'm going to go fix this. Okay, so now I've got all the art that I need. I've got my titles and my button. So let's go in and make a start menu. So I'm going to go to Godot and click on my game and click edit. And so there are some versions of this in the assets. We're going to create it from scratch so I can go over some of the UI stuff because it's a little bit different than the basic game stuff. But if you go into assets and go into scenes and look in UI, you're going to see versions of this stuff. There might be some small differences, but they're mainly the same stuff. So there's a start menu here, there's instructions, there's a game win, and a game over. And these are all based on the same things, so they have similar templates. There's also scripts for these. So there's a menu script, which we're going to use for all of our menus. So we'll add this in a little bit. So I'm going to leave the assets folder and go to my own scenes folder. And I'm going to make a new folder in here. Right now I have components and I have levels, but I don't have anything for UI. So I'm going to right click on scenes and make a new folder and call this UI. This is all my user interface stuff. And in here, I'm going to make a new scene. So I'm going to right click again and click new scene. And I'm going to call this main, or call this start menu. So this is actually where we're going to start when we open the game from now on. So when I create my start menu, instead of creating a 2D scene like I usually do, I'm going to create a user interface node. This is a node that lets me do layout that gets superimposed over the game window. So it doesn't move around when I move the camera and other stuff like that. It just shows the graphics in the same place regardless of where I am in the game. So for my start menu, I'm going to change the name of the main node to start menu. And I'm going to start by adding some graphics and then adding my buttons. And one of the things you'll notice with the layout is that there's a lot of different layout components and they do specific different things. So getting the right layout can be a little bit tricky. So there's a lot of containers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a child node. If you go to control here, the green nodes, you'll see there's all sorts of different stuff in here. There's containers. There's a center container, grid container, panel container. There's all sorts of different little containers. Okay, then there are things like labels, texture, rect, tabs. Then there's buttons. So under buttons, there's a button, there's a link button, there's a texture button. There's all sorts of different buttons. So we're going to look at using a few of these different components. I'm going to start with the center container. I want to keep everything centered. And then when I'm doing the layout, what I can do, there's a special little layout button here. And this lets me do different anchoring. So I can anchor stuff to the top left, top right, different parts of my screen. For this one, I'm going to do full rect, so it takes up my full screen. And then inside here, I'm going to lay out my scene. So I'm going to put another child node, and I'm going to put the title. So I'm going to choose a texture rect, and I'm going to call this the title. And then I'm going to put the title graphics that I put in here. So I'm going to click empty and go to load, go to sprites, go into titles, and choose my game title. And there we go. There it is. We've got our game title. So that's cool. So now we can add some other stuff into the scene. I need some buttons so that we can click to start the game or view the instructions. So I want to add a vertical container. So I'm going to go to my center container and add a child node. And in here, I'm going to find a vertical container. It may be in box. Here we go, a VBox container. So I'm going to create a VBox container. This is going to be my buttons container. So inside here, I'm going to put all my buttons, and the vertical box is going to make them sit on top of each other. So a vertical box will make them sit on top of each other. A horizontal box will make them sit next to each other. So in here, I'm going to add another node. I'm going to find a button. So here's the base button. And what I want is a texture button because I created my own textures instead of using the Godot default. So I'm going to click create here. And here's my texture button. I don't see my, oh, there it is. There's my textures. Okay. So in the texture button, you have this option for different textures. So the normal is just your base texture. So for that one, I'm going to go to load, go to sprites, and go to button. And I'm just going to use the black button. Okay, it's a little bit smaller than I thought, so we may need to make them bigger, but that's okay. So then for pressed, I'm going to go to load and go to sprites, go to buttons, and I'm going to use the white one. And then for hover, I'm going to use the dithered one. And we may need to make some changes, but we'll see. So there's my first button. I'm going to add some text here. So I'm going to go to add child node, and we're going to add a label. So a label is just our basic text. And then we can type whatever we want here. So I can write start. And we may need to center this. So to center something, I actually have to add a whole new node. I have to add a center container. So I'm going to put a center container and then put the label there. Okay, that's a little bit better. It still looks a little weird. Let's see if we can match it to, there we go. Okay, that looks a little better. It may be hard to figure it out at first. So let's take a look at how this button looks, and then we may make some changes. I'm going to run this scene. Okay, so there's my game. And when I hover, nothing happens. Wonder why that is. Oh, maybe my label is blocking. Uh, let's delete the label for a second and see if it works. Okay. Yeah, so now it is working. So there's got to be a way to ignore the label. Let's see. I forget how to do this. Let's just Google it real quick. Go ignore label in front of button. Not coming up right away, so we may have to draw our own buttons, but that's fine. We can do that real quick. Let's try Godot UI ignore node mouse. Shoot, I thought there was an easy way to do this, but I don't see it on here. So let's just make some specific buttons, and then I'll figure this out later. Oh wait, here's the mouse section. Oh, here we go. Okay. Pass. There we go. Okay, so now we should be able to see the button. Nope. We may have to set that on our container as well. There we go. Okay. So it's not perfectly aligned. Let's fix this just a little bit. And then what we can do is change the color of the texture as well. So we can go down here to visibility, and I can modulate this color. So I can make button colors match whatever I want. Okay. So that's our first button. We're just going to duplicate this button for the rest of our buttons. Although the other thing is that these are really small. Yeah, they're way too small. So let's make our art bigger. I'm just going to go back to my button. And when I go to export, I'm just going to scale them up to 2. And I'll export them the same way. So I'll put button underscore here and click download zip. And so we're just going to have to replace those buttons in our zip folder. So I'm going to go to my game, go to sprites. Here's my new button zip. I'm going to extract. And it's going to ask me if I want to replace. And I'm going to say replace the files. And so now when I go back to Godot, it should update. There we go. Now it's bigger. So now we have to make this section bigger. Not letting me. Okay, I don't know why it's not letting me do this, so let's just delete this. The Godot UI stuff can be kind of fussy, so let's just add it again. So I'll add a texture button and go to my textures and go to sprites, go to button. Here's my main texture. My pressed and my hover. That's one thing that's a little frustrating with Godot. We kind of saw that with the tile maps. Like sometimes when it doesn't like something, it doesn't really let you fix it. Okay, let's add back our center container and make sure to turn the filter to pass. And let's say full rect. And let's add our label and put in start. And now we can make it a little bit bigger. So let's go to uh, go to the font, styles, and change the height here. Oh, it won't let me do that. Sorry, this looks a little bit different than the last time I did this. That's not what I want. Okay, this is if we want to add our own font, which is not what we want to do right now. So let's see. Okay, let's scale it up. Okay. So now we can just duplicate this button. So this is my start button. And so if I click on this and I go to duplicate, I can make another button for my instructions. And I can duplicate it again. And I can make a quit button so the user can quit the game. And we're going to connect all of these buttons to a script in a second. So then for the instructions, I'm going to just click instructions. And then we're going to full rect the center container and scale this up. That's a little bit too big. Let's do 1.25. Yeah, doing layout is a little tricky, but you'll get used to it eventually. Okay, that looks okay. Then we'll go to our quit button, change this to quit. And we can scale this one up. And then we'll full rect this and move this up a little bit. Okay, not perfect, but this is a good start. So we have start, instructions, and quit. I don't know why the start text is changing, but whatever. In the other UI lesson, we will have to use our own font, so these will look a little bit better. But anyway, we've got some buttons. They sort of work. You could draw on the actual art if you want it to look a little bit better, because the label system is not the best here. So obviously there's a lot we could do to make this look better, but for now, I just want to connect this to our script. So we're going to skip to that bit and then see how that works. So to add a script here, I'm going to click on the start menu and then go to my script and click the empty and click load. And I'm going to use the default script from the asset. So I'm going to go into 270 assets, go to scripts, and go to menu. And so when I click on the menu script, you'll see that there's parts of the menu for each one of our buttons. So there's the start button, the instructions button, and the quit button. And I actually named these incorrectly, so I'm going to want to make sure to name them correctly. There's also some sound effects. I forget if I actually made the sound effects. Let's look at our audio folder. If I made these sound effects, then we can add them in. No, I didn't make any UI sound effects, so maybe we'll do that next time. But we'll just ignore that part of it for now. So on the start button, when we press this button, we have to give it a level to load. So we'll do that in the editor. On the instructions button, we're going to go to the instructions level. That doesn't exist yet, so we'll make that in a second. And then if we click the quit button, the game just quits. So it's a pretty straightforward script. So let's go back and connect everything. So first we want to set the level to load if we hit the start button. So we want to go into scenes, go to levels, and go to level 1. You can load whatever level you want there. The instructions we haven't made yet, so I'm going to ignore that for now. So next I go to the start button, and I have to connect this to my script. So I'm going to go to node and go to pressed and double click and then click connect. And you'll see that green signal connects to the function because the start button matches start button over here. So I'm not going to get this right if I don't change my other buttons. So that's what this will look like. If I go to instructions and click pressed and it doesn't match, you're going to get some new code down here that's not going to do what we want it to. So we don't want to do that. So I'm going to undo. I'm going to go back to my instructions button and disconnect. And then I'm going to name my instructions button correctly. So I'm going to rename this instructions button. Obviously, you could also just change the code, but we want to make sure that it connects. So now I'm going to connect my instructions button. You can see it connects right here. Last one is my quit button. So I'm going to double click on pressed again and click connect. And I made a mistake again. It has to have button in it. So I'm going to rename this quit button. And I have to delete this. So I'm going to disconnect, double click again and connect. And now we connected everything. So now it works. So let's test these out. I'm going to run the scene. And so here's my game. If I click instructions, it's not going to work because I haven't made that scene yet. If I click quit, the game goes away. So that one worked. And if I click on start, we start the game. Sorry, it's a little loud. Okay, so now we're just going to quickly make the rest of our UI scenes and add them into our game. So I'm going to go to the UI and take the start menu. And I'm going to duplicate this 3 times to make my instructions menu and to make my end game and win game menus. So pretty much everything is going to work. All I have to do is change the graphics. So I'm going to go to start menu and duplicate and call this instructions menu. And then I'm going to duplicate that and call it game over menu. And one more time, I'm going to call it game win menu. Okay, While I'm still in the start menu, I'm going to fill in my instructions path. So I'm going to go back to the start menu, click on the main node, go to my script variables, go to instructions path, and add my new instructions menu. So I'm going to open that here. The rest of my scenes won't go to the instructions path, so I don't have to worry about them yet or in other places. So I'm going to save this. So let's go to instructions menu. Everything stays the same except the graphics. So where I have title here, I'm going to reset the graphics. I'm going to load, go to sprites, go to titles, and choose instructions and click open. Okay, my buttons are sort of covering up my instructions, so let's just move them to the side. So I'm going to click on my center container. I'm going to add a new child. I'm going to do a horizontal, or sorry, an H box, which is a horizontal box, so it's an H box. And then I'm going to put my two nodes inside the H box, and that puts them next to each other. Then for my buttons, I want that to be centered, so I need a new center container. So I'm going to add another center container. So it is a little weird, but you have to add all these containers to get it to look the way you want. So now I have my instructions and my buttons. The fonts are looking weird, but we'll figure that out later. And so now I can see everything is still connected. The start button is still connected, the quit button is still connected, so I don't actually have to do anything else as long as I set up the first scene correctly. Since I'm on the instruction scene already, I don't need an instructions button, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that node. So there we go, I'm all done with the instructions menu. Let's test if it works. I'm going to go back to my start menu. I'm going to run this, and now I can click on my instruction button, and here we are. And then if I click start, we still go to our level 1. So that looks good. Let's make our other two menus. So for my game over menu, I'm going to double click on here. And I'm going to change the title first. I'm going to reset the texture, go to load, go to sprites, go to titles. And this is game over, so I'm going to choose game over and save that. And then I'm going to take out the instructions button. I guess I could leave it there. Maybe if you lose the game, you want to look at the instructions again. So I'll leave it there for this one. This is the same thing. It should work. We're not going to put this in quite yet because we're going to go over adding UI into the game in our next class. So we're all done with this. And now I'm going to go to the game win and do the same thing, just change the title here. So I'm going to click load and go to sprites, titles, you win. Okay, so that looks pretty good, or it doesn't really look that good, but you guys get the idea. And you don't just have to do, for UI stuff, it's usually used for things like start menus and other stuff like that, but it could be used for other components of your game. Maybe you have cutscenes with narrative. You could use UI scenes for that. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with user interface elements and layouts that don't necessarily have to do with the start menu. So one last thing I'm going to do before we end for today, I'm going to make the start menu the main menu of my game. So I'm going to go to project settings and I'm going to go to run, and where it says main scene, I'm going to take out the level that I had there, and I'm going to go into scenes and go to UI and go to start menu. So now when I press the build button, the play button here, instead of the play scene button, we'll see that the main scene is my start menu. And when we build for our final project to update our itch.io page, that'll work the same way. So now if I hit start, now I can start the game. Although I realize I have X for jump, not Z. So I'm just going to change it instead of changing the art. I'll go to project settings, input map, and my jump button, let's change this to Z because that's what I wrote in my directions. Okay. So that's everything for our first user interface lesson. On Tuesday, we're going to go over a lot more. We're going to learn how to put user interface inside the game. so we can add our game over and game win screens, and also add metrics to keep track of our lives and items. Okay, so I'm going to save this here, and I'm going to stop recording.